So once again, good afternoon and welcome to today's Medicaid Revalidation for Practitioners webinar. The key objectives for today, we're trying to familiarize practitioners, all of the providers on the call here, with the revalidation process, as well as a brief overview of the provider enrollment form that you're going to use to revalidate. We're going to start with general information on the revalidation process. Then we're going to walk you through the different steps that you're going to be going to revalidate, show you that enrollment form, and in particular, how you're going to be choosing revalidate as the option and go through some of the different sections of the form. And then we'll wind things up with the important reminders and then some reference and contact information. We'll begin on eMedNY's website. So this is, and hopefully you're all familiar with emedny.org. I'm sure you signed up for today's session from the website. When you land on eMedNY's website, you'll notice in the middle under the Welcome to New York, there's a revalidation button. So we'll start the process today by going to that button that says revalidation. And that'll bring you to the revalidation landing page. Pretty much everything you're going to need to know is going to be found within this revalidation page. And we'll go through all of the different little drop-down windows that you see here, starting at the top where there was an update to revalidation and the process back in August of this year. And basically, if you read through that little box there on revalidation, the general overview, it's letting providers know that the revalidation process was suspended during the COVID-19 public health emergency, and that has since been restarted. And letters have been going out to providers regarding their revalidation. Your revalidation dates that are published on the Medicaid enrolled provider listing and those that appear on your provider enrollment files, they're estimated dates, and they are subject to change. And as such, we would want you to make sure that you're not going ahead and revalidating just on your own because you think it's time to revalidate. We also want to make sure that your correspondence address on your enrollment file is current and is accurate, because the information that's going to be pertaining to revalidation and the letters that you're going to get are basically being sent to your correspondence address that's on your enrollment file. And as I said, we really want to emphasize that you should not be sending in a revalidation application until you've actually been notified in mail to do so. A lot of providers are hearing about revalidation. They're hearing it through the grapevine. Did you get your revalidation yet? Did you get it? If you didn't get your notification directly regarding revalidation, please, as it says here in bold, do not send in a revalidation application. All right. Right at the top here, we want to emphasize that, and we'll remind you again later. So don't revalidate until you receive a letter in the mail asking you to do so. Back on the revalidation homepage, the first question here is, well, when is a provider due to revalidate? And Medicaid providers are required to revalidate at least every 5 years upon notification by the State Department of Health. It could be less, it could be more. Again, some people it's more, some providers it's more because of that pause due to the COVID-19. But again, when you get your letter to revalidate, that's your cue. That's when you're going to actually go ahead and revalidate. And by the way, before I go on with the stages of revalidation here, revalidation is different from annual recertification. So in New York State Medicaid, there's also something called recertification, and that's when you fill out a certification form signed by your provider, notarized, and then that's sent in on an annual basis. That's done annually. Today's conversation is about revalidation, and as it says here, that's required at least every 5 years. As far as the stages of revalidation, and again, you'll be able to access this on eMedNY's website. I'm showing you the different highlights here, but once you go to the revalidation page on eMedNY, you'll be able to go through all of this at your own pace. So the stages of revalidation are going to start with an initial letter. So an initial notification letter telling you that you're going to have to revalidate is going to be sent to that correspondence address that's on file. Once you get that notification letter, that's now your cue to go ahead and submit that revalidation application as soon as possible. If we didn't hear back from you with your revalidation packet after your initial letter, a final letter will be sent to tell you that you have to revalidate. And then if you don't revalidate after receiving the final letter, you would be subject to termination from the Medicaid program. So it's crucial that when you get that initial letter, respond to it as soon as possible. If you don't, you're going to get that final letter. And then if you don't respond after that final letter, it's very possible that you may be subject to termination from Medicaid. Once the application for your revalidation has been received and then screened by eMedNy, the application is going to be processed by the State Department of Health's Bureau of Provider Enrollment. At that point, no further action is going to be required unless you're actually contacted by the Bureau of Provider Enrollment. Then once your application has been processed successfully, it'll be considered completed, and a letter is going to be sent indicating that your revalidation was successful. And again, at that point, no further action is going to be needed unless the State Department of Health actually reaches out to you or it's time to revalidate again. We already mentioned the termination. We don't want to go there, right? So if you did not actually submit in that application for revalidation by the deadline in that notification letter or letters, your enrollment will be terminated. And if your enrollment is terminated due to not submitting that revalidation, you would have to go through the reinstatement process, right? So that's a possibility. Your application not being processed, you at that point would have to go through reinstatement, not revalidation, but reinstatement may then be required for you to enroll again as a provider in New York State Medicaid. We've been mentioning your correspondence address and the importance of making sure that it's correct. You also have a way to change your addresses. There are several ways that you can do that, but on this page, when you're on eMedNy's website, there is a link that could bring you to the change of address form. And for those of you who are currently enrolled in the provider enrollment portal for practitioners, we call it the PE portal, you have the ability in the PE portal to check your addresses that are on file as well. So that's another way to verify your address, the correspondence, pay to addresses, service addresses. You can do that through the PE portal for those who are enrolled. And you can also request a report on eMedNy's website. There's a report that you could fill out, a locator code report that'll tell you all of the different types of addresses you have on file for a given provider. Back to the revalidation page. Next up, we have how to revalidate once you receive your notification. So it's broken down into 4 basic steps, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into these steps in a little bit, but just for an overview here, step 1, you're going to go to the provider enrollment page, and you'll be clicking on the links for the provider index page when you're actually in this yourself. Step 2, you're going to click on the type of provider that you are, and you're going to complete that enrollment form. And I'll show you a little bit more how to do this coming up. Step 3, not only do you have to complete the enrollment form, but you also have to complete any additional documents and requirements that are needed for your type of enrollment. So you'll do step 3. And then step 4 is basically mailing your enrollment form completed, and as well as any other additional documents that have to be submitted. And you can send that to the address that you see on the screen. There's actually an expedited address too for priority mailing, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. So those are the four steps in a nutshell. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into that process once I get through the initial revalidation page highlights here. So what happens next? Once you've sent all that good stuff in, well, that packet is pre-screened by eMedNy, And if there are any errors in the application form itself or in the material that you've submitted in that packet, then you would be notified of that. Send it back to you. It will be returned with a checklist detailing what was missing or what was required that you didn't complete. If there were no errors, then that revalidation application is going to be scanned and entered into the eMedNY system. And as it says here, that may take 2 to 3 weeks from the time it's received. If you wanted to, you could contact the eMedNY call center to obtain something called an enrollment tracking number or an ETN, sort of help you get an idea as to the status of the documents that you sent for revalidation. So once that's scanned in by eMedNY, then it's going to be reviewed by the State Department of Health's Bureau of Provider Enrollment, or BPE. If any additional information is required, the state BPE will reach out to you, the provider, through the email address that's on file as the applicant's email on your enrollment form. And once we get into the form, I'll show you where it's important to put these email addresses on there. They're actually required. And once that revalidation is successfully processed, you will get a letter indicating that it's been processed to the address that's on file, and you'll be notified in the future when it's time to revalidate again. All right, so those are the two main steps there: pre-screening and then review and approval by the State Department of Health's Bureau of Provider Enrollment. We have a frequently asked questions back to the revalidation page. If you go to the FAQs section, this is only 3 of them. I think there are, last I looked, 29 frequently asked questions. So if you do have questions, again, after today's session, definitely go to the FAQs section here, and you can look up all of the different questions that have come in. We had prior webinars, and as providers are filling these out and going back and forth and asking questions, we've been posting a lot of those frequently asked questions as well. So definitely you can check here for those FAQs. And then lastly, at the bottom of the revalidation page, we have additional resources. And on the resources page, again, it links you to the FAQs. There is a presentation there that the state gave quite a while back. There's a category of service form and search tool and a list of upcoming provider training. So again, today's the October 24th session. If you wanted to sign up again, we are going to have them at this point monthly, and once in November, once in December. And those links are listed here. Or if there are other people in your office that couldn't make it today, they can always sign up for the webinars coming up in November and December. All right, so that's pretty much the overview. Let's start to dig a little bit deeper into the steps that I mentioned very, very briefly a few minutes ago. So looking at the steps here, we're going to go to step 1. Step 1 is going to the eMedNY provider enrollment page. So we're already there. You can see here the provider enrollment already highlighted. From the provider enrollment page, we're going to go to step 2, and we're going to select practitioner in the appropriate provider type. So on the right-hand side, we have practitioner. We're going to select practitioner. Today, we're discussing practitioner enrollment. If there are institutional or businesses or groups, they have different paths that they would follow. So we're going to put a little dot in the radio button to select practitioner. And that's going to open up a list of the valid practitioners. And you can see here, I'll pause for a second. Hopefully you're one of the provider types here that's considered a practitioner. And for today's training purposes, I'm just going to choose physician as one of the practitioner types. Once you choose your appropriate type, you're then going to have a couple of options. Are you going to be revalidating with, let's say, option 1, which is an individual that's going to be actually billing Medicaid, or possibly option 2, where you're not billing Medicaid, you're an OPRA provider, where you're either just ordering, prescribing, referring, or an attending provider. So you're not actively billing for your services to Medicaid. That's option 2. So you'll choose the appropriate option, and you'll notice there's a click here within there. So you can click there, and that's going to bring up your provider enrollment page. So as I said, we're using physician in this example. It'll be specific to your type of provider when you choose your specific category of service. So on this page, you'll see for step 4, your enrollment form, the PDF version of your enrollment form is listed actually twice. Once there at the top right, and then again, a little further down, both the same form. You can click on either one of them and that'll open up the form for you. And we'll go through the form in a couple of minutes. We'll then tell you your category of service. And that's important because one of the first fields you're going to have to answer on that form is what's the category of service that you're revalidating. So we'll tell you your category of service, and we'll also let you know if there's an application fee involved. Some providers do have an application fee. As we continue down on this page, you'll then see that there are general instructions for the enrollment form. So you'll look at those instructions. And then we have several collapsible or collapsed fields here. So as you click on them, we're going to now go to the additional instructions for your enrollment form. And when you open that up, you'll see it'll explain your category of service. And then it walks you through some of the steps. So if you have that form in front of you, you'll be able to go ahead and answer those questions, fill out those fields based upon the instructions you see here. We then have a section for requirements and additional forms. So depending on the type of provider or type of practitioner you are, you'll see additional forms that you would have to possibly include in your revalidation packet. And you can see a list of them here for physicians. There are also maintenance forms. There could be certain maintenance forms that you have to fill out as well. And some forms can actually be filled out. You heard me mention earlier the PE portal, the provider enrollment portal, that online database that you can do certain things with licenses, provider enrollment. So there are certain forms, maintenance forms in particular, that you can complete online in the PE portal. And you'll see links to those forms here, wherever you see one of those links. Otherwise, if you click on the actual form itself, that typically opens up a PDF document for you to manually complete. So those are your maintenance forms. And then we do have mailing instructions. I already mentioned before, the general standard mailing address was on the screen, but here's that expedited priority mailing address if you wanted to use that option to submit your enrollment form and any of the required documents along with it. And again, this is a paper. This is probably one of the questions that some of you are maybe waiting to ask. This is a paper process, revalidation. We've been getting questions about how do I revalidate electronically for Medicaid? The answer right now is you don't. Revalidation is through paper. Now I'm going to show you coming up now the practitioner revalidation form. And you can fill this out. It is a typable form on our website where I just showed you, but it's something that you're going to have to type out online and then print it. And then you're going to have to actually mail it. So if you are looking, or you were looking on the website, and I actually had a call about this from a provider a couple of days ago, where do I revalidate electronically? You really can't. It has to be done. The revalidation has to be done on a hard copy, printed out paper form. So speaking of that enrollment form that you're going to be used to revalidate, let's take a quick look at that form. And I'm not going to go very deep into it because, again, this is a general overview for practitioners. This is the practitioner enrollment form, but all of the different types of practitioners, and you saw that mini list there, you all have your own slightly different way of doing things based upon your category of service and the documents that you're going to have to include. So this, again, is just going to be a general overview of what the form looks like, and I'll try to point you at least in the direction of at least some of the fields. So starting at the top of the provider enrollment form, you have the category of service field, and that's where you're going to enter in your 4-digit category of service. And as I said before, we're using physicians as the example. So the instructions will tell you to put in 0460, which is the category of service for a physician. Depending on your practitioner type, you'll have a different category of service. You then have three options for this form. Are you using it for a new provider enrollment, revalidation, or reinstatement reactivation? Obviously, today we're here for revalidation. So you're going to check off where it says revalidation. Okay, so you'll check off revalidation. The next section of the form, you're going to give us the applicant's name, last name, first name, middle initial, the NPI number of the individual, and if you're incorporated, you'll have to complete a group application as well if necessary. Social Security number, license number, the state of licensure if not from New York. Is this a limited license? Yes or no? The applicant's email address, and again, this is required. You must give us the applicant's email address here. Then are you enrolled in Medicare? Yes or no? If you have a DEA number, you'll give us your DEA number as well as the effective date of the DEA number and the expiration date. And then you'll answer if you're affiliated with a group. Do you have a private practice as well? Yes or no, or not applicable. And if you are a member of a group or organization, you're going to give that group or organization's name and then the NPI number next to it. And as I said, this is a fillable or a typable form. So you'll be able to go into these fields and type it in. You'll just, with the understanding that once everything is completely typed in, you're going to print it out and send that hard copy. A couple of things about the typable or printable form here. Make sure you start at the very beginning of the line because you might actually run out of space if you don't. So make sure you're starting your cursor at the very beginning of the line. And one of the best reasons to fill it out this way instead of just printing it out blank and then handwriting it is that, as far as being legible, it's a lot easier for us to read it and process it correctly the first go around when it's cleanly typed this way versus handwriting it and hoping for the best that we can understand what you're writing in over there. So it's always good and highly recommended that you fill it out here and then print out the hard copy. Once you've given us that information, then we start asking about your addresses that you have on file. So the first one's going to be that correspondence address, and that's going to indicate where letters and claim forms, if any, are going to be sent. One thing about the correspondence address, you cannot enter a PO box in this field. That's not acceptable. All right, so you give us your correspondence address in that first section. And then your pay to address is going to be below that. And that's going to be where paper checks and remittance statements are going to be sent. You should really be getting electronic, your EFT, electronic funds transfer for your payments, your reimbursements, and then some version of an electronic remittance or a PDF version of a remittance. But if you are still getting paper or for some reason paper has to be sent, that's going to be your pay to address. And then you have a corporate address, and that's where your tax documents, your annual tax documents, like your 1099 forms are going to be sent. And as you see here, an email address is required in that field. So that's important that you give us that email address. Once you've given us your correspondence, pay to, and corporate address, you're then going to have room for your service address or multiple addresses. There's actually room here for up to 4 service addresses. You can, if you have more than 4, you can make a copy of this form and then continue adding service addresses, but it has to be on either this form here or a copy of the form. And this is where you'll put in your service address. And a big note about your service address, let's say, for example, as a practitioner, if you're a private duty nurse and you go to somebody's home for your services, you do not want to list a patient's home as a service address. As it says there in big bold print there, you do not want to do that. But this is where you're going to give us your service address, as well as indicating whether or not your practice is an individual or a group, and the place of service. Is this a service address a private office, a freestanding clinic, or a hospital or a nursing home? And if you only have one service address, well, you can just fill it out here. There's going to be room for, I believe, 4 of them. And as I said, if you have more than 4, you can always make a copy of this form and add additional service addresses. The next section is something called the disclosure of ownership and control. And section 1 of this has to do with the disclosing entity applicant. And as it says here, this is the individual named on page 2 of the application that we've already started. So you're going to give us under section 1 the name, NPI. It's asking for the home street address here, city, state, zip, social security number, and the date of birth, again, of the individual named back on page 2 of this application. As far as the second part of section 1 here, ownership and applicant, if that applies, you can fill that out. And if you're not sure what this disclosure of ownership and control has to really do with, there are several hyperlinks throughout that bring you to the regulations. And you can always read through those regulations to see whether or not some of these sections really do apply to you, or if you're actually able to skip them. Sections 2, 3, and 4 having to do with ownership. For practitioner type providers, these usually don't apply to practitioner type providers. So it's very possible that you might be able to skip sections 2, 3, and 4. If you do, you can put in this first name field here. You could put N/A for not applicable. You can possibly do that if you'd like for sections 2, 3, and 4. But again, you're going to have to do a little bit, deeper of a dive into whether or not this will apply to you. And again, you can always refer to the regulations through those hyperlinks that I showed within the form. Section 5 has to do with managing employees, agents, and those with a controlling interest. And again, it's quite possible that you as a practitioner might not have to fill out section 5. And if this doesn't apply to you, where it says name over here on this first one, you could just simply type in none, N-O-N-E, in that first box under name, and we'll just know to continue without having to be concerned about section 5. But again, we would want you to first check where it says click here if you're not familiar with the regulations that are stated here as to whether or not this applies to you. Section 6 are several questions that have to be answered. And depending on your answers for questions 1 through 4, if you happen to answer yes to any of these questions 1 through 4, then you also have to complete and submit something called a prior conduct questionnaire, which you'll be able to find back on eMedNY's website. But again, all of these questions have to be answered. And then at the very end of the form, we have your attestation or your affirmation, as well as your signature. So read through all of the information here, and then you're going to sign an original signature, not a rubber stamp. The applicant provider's signature must be here, dated, and then the name and telephone number of the person who prepared the application. All right, and again, just to reiterate, no rubber stamps. This must be an original, what we call a wet signature. So that's a brief walkthrough of the form, pretty much from top to bottom. So some important reminders that we've already mentioned, but bear repeating. Do not send in a revalidation application until you receive that notification in the mail to do so. All right, so don't jump the gun on this one. We really want you to wait until you get that revalidation notification in the mail before you submit your revalidation. Any omissions are going to delay the process, so make sure you go through it, you take your time. You don't want to be doing other things all at the same time. Focus on this, because if you leave things out or they're inaccurate or missing, it could delay the process, might be sent back to you. Make sure you respond to requests for additional information if you receive any. The documentation that I showed you is available on eMedNY's website to help you through this process step by step. And we do, as I said, want you to carefully review the form that's found on the website that we just went through. Go through the instructions. Again, all of the different types of practitioners might have slight variations. So make sure you're bringing up the correct instructions and the correct page for your type of provider. And again, just follow those instructions before you complete the form. And then, of course, before you submit it, double check everything. Make sure everything is completed and all of the additional forms that you have to submit along with your application are included in the packet. And it's always a good idea to make sure you keep a copy of everything, right? You try to make copies of everything. This way, you always have something on hand to say, oh, okay, I sent this in and this is what I sent. Your mailing options, standard. There's the address for eMedNY at P.O. Box 4603 in Rensselaer, 12144-4603. And if you wanted to send expedited or priority mail, also to eMedNY, but there's an attention box 4603, 327 Columbia Turnpike in Rensselaer, 12144. So those are your two mailing options. So we're going to wrap things up here with some reference and contact information. Of course, where we started back on eMedNY's website at emedny.org, where you'll find all of the enrollment forms, as well as all the information that you're going to need on that revalidation page. The Bureau of Provider Enrollment, the New York State BPE, the provider enrollment at health.ny.gov. That's the email address if you had to reach out to the state directly. And then, of course, eMedNY's call center at 800-343-9000 if you had additional concerns or questions about the revalidation process. You can always reach out to the eMedNY call center at the 800-343-9000 number.